Well, hello there. My name is Joseph Landing, and today I will be doing a reading of the third chapter of my new book, Bobbit Rock, a psychological horror novel. If you'd like to see my other works, you can follow the links below in the description. And please remember to like and subscribe, comment, and share. I want as many people as possible to hear this audiobook. It's free, and I intend to do the entire book. So like, comment, share, subscribe, whatever you want. And I really do hope you enjoy. And if you haven't seen the first two chapters, it's in the playlist, which you can find. And then keep your eye out for the fourth chapter, which will be coming up. So without further ado, let's check out the third chapter of Bobbit Rock, The Redhead. Chapter 3, The Redhead. Left, right, up. At least you can get a good visual of your surroundings that way. Isaac awoke at dawn on the nursery floor. The first thing he saw was Emily's picture. He had left a bloody fingerprint on it. God. Isaac flexed his hand, groaning from the pain. Damn it, he swore, and shakily rose to his feet. Some blood had seeped through the bandage and stained the carpet as well. Crap, he muttered. He walked to the bathroom and hopped into the shower. After cleaning up, he changed the dressing on his hand, wincing as he did so. He popped another pain pill and then glanced at himself in the mirror. The utter exhaustion on his face did not go by unnoticed. He moved back to the nursery and retrieved the photo of Emily. He tucked it back into his wallet and then went downstairs to grab the portrait of Emily from the wreckage. He took that to the bedroom and gazed upon the bed. Okay, Emily. He placed the portrait on Emily's side and took a deep breath. He moved to his side and for the first time in 3 months, got into the bed. He laid his head back on the pillow and looked over at Emily's side. Her portrait looked back at him. Isaac closed his eyes. Later, the distant ringing of his cell phone roused Isaac from his sleep. His bedside clock read 3 p.m. He'd slept most of the day. He glanced at the portrait of Emily and sighed. He then slowly got out of bed. He trotted downstairs and withdrew his phone from the debris. There were several missed calls and text messages from David. Averting his eyes from the disaster that was his kitchen and dining room, he raised the phone to his ear. Hey, sorry I missed last night, Isaac began. Meanwhile, across town, David drove down the streets of Callahan on his motorcycle. His helmet featured a built-in speaker system that hooked up to his phone, allowing him to talk on the phone while driving his bike. Yeah, no worries, man. I figured someone came up. Isaac glanced down at his bandaged hand and grimaced. So what was it? Because you didn't show up to work today. Chief's going to be on your ass for that, especially given these circumstances. Isaac gently prodded his hand and winced. He reached for the bottle of pain pills. Yeah, I spent the night in the hospital, so I'm going to head in with a good excuse. I'm also kind of loopy from the pain meds. Shit, are you good? What happened? The passing asphalt reflected in the black lens of David's visor. Rain began to spatter the visor, so he slowed down for safety. Isaac gingerly touched his hand, shaking his head at his own stupidity and morbidity. I had an unfortunate run-in with the mirror in my dining room. An unfortunate run-in? David asked. Isaac cracked a smile. I punched the shit out of it. Well, that doesn't sound healthy. Isaac chuckled. Seriously, Isaac, I can't watch you destroy yourself every day. Please reach out to me when you are feeling low. I'm here for you, David stated. Isaac took a deep breath and considered David's statement. Thank you. It's just difficult. I don't want to let go. David gritted his teeth. The rain came down heavier and he took a turn. Callahan PD was just up ahead. He pulled into the parking lot and parked his motorcycle. He popped up his visor and pulled out a cigarette. Losing someone you love. I'm so sorry I must go through this, but let us help you. We're going to play poker again tonight. This time, show up. You don't need 2 hands to play. I know you're not much of a poker player, but it'll be good for you. Anything to get you out of that damn house. David lit up a smoke and took a drag before heading inside. Okay, I'll come by. 9 p.m., right? Isaac asked. Yeah, bring some brews. We'll have a good time. See you in a bit. Oh, and York says he's assigning us a trainee. One of the new recruits he just hired. Isaac's ears perked up. Really? Who's the unlucky man? David chuckled.
Unlucky woman! Grace Fletcher, young and apparently whip-smart. Still a boot, though. We'll see how soon the city chews her up and spits her out.
I'd be willing to put money on it, Isaac suggested.
Please, you're the worst gambler I've ever seen.
Is that why you insist I play poker, so you can rob me?
Well...
Later, on Isaac's desk was a fresh stack of reports. It was the forensic and autopsy results of the redhead. Isaac thumbed through the pages, scanning over the info. James O'Donnell, age 25, numerous broken bones and traumatic organ damage. Death was by broken neck due to 40-foot fall. Isaac muttered. He moved on to the evidence, and a grimace split his face.
God damn it!
The results were, as expected, absolutely nothing. There was no relevant evidence that could be used to identify a suspect. Isaac grabbed the file in a fury and stormed downstairs to forensics. He pushed through the door of the lab and approached one of the white-coated scientists, a balding man in his early 60s with thick-rimmed glasses.
Nathan, you can't tell me there's nothing. You've got to give me something on the O'Donnell case.
Isaac was near desperate. Nathan Legree took off his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. Deep circles hung under them. The forensics lab was a mess, and the press crowded the entrance. Scientists sprinted left and right with glasses askew and sweat on their brows. A woman in a white lab coat bumped right into Isaac, her arms overflowing with files and evidence bags.
"Sorry,"
she exclaimed. Isaac regained his composure and held up the O'Donnell file in front of Nathan's face.
"It says clearly that there was an obvious struggle in his apartment before he fell. Hell, his lower intestines were hanging out when he jumped."
"That's what the witnesses all said," Nathan said. Isaac glanced again at the file. Right, to escape whatever was attacking him. But in all that struggle, overturned sofa and bed, slashes on furniture, cuts on the wall, blood spatter, but no fingerprints, no locks of hair, no skin cells, no nothing that could identify the suspect? Nathan stared at Isaac blankly.
"Why are you questioning me like this is out of the ordinary?"
Isaac lowered the file, his arms feeling heavier than bricks. Right, I just hoped there might be something this time, Isaac bemoaned. Nathan lowered his eyes. He reached out a hand and touched Isaac's shoulder reassuringly.
"No, not this time, but soon. We'll find something, I swear to God."
Nathan's comforting words were unfortunately hollow. Isaac shook his head and looked Nathan over. "When are you leaving?" he asked. Nathan jumped a little. He cast a glance around to make absolutely sure no one else was listening to their conversation.
"How'd you find out?"
he asked nervously, worried he might have let something slip. Isaac waved away his concern. "It's only a matter of time for just about everyone here. We're losing people every day. I don't blame anyone who wants out, especially the folks with kids or are close to retirement. You planning on heading back to Pensacola?" Nathan managed a small smile.
"Yes, in another month, and I'm putting in my 2 weeks. As the saying goes, I'm too old for this shit."
Isaac held out his hand and Nathan shook it. "Well, best of luck then for when you leave. Until then, help me out as best you can."
"Always, Isaac."
Isaac checked his watch. "Well, I've got to go speak to the O'Donnell family in 10 minutes.
"More people wanting answers you don't have?"
Nathan asked. "Unfortunately, yes, and all I can give them is an empty promise." Isaac tucked the O'Donnell file under his arm and gave Nathan a nod before leaving the crumbling forensics lab. As soon as he crossed the threshold into the hallway, he saw that Captain York was waiting for him. A smoldering cigarette hung from his lips as he acknowledged Isaac. York's shoulders were a little slumped, and he was leaning rather heavily onto his gun holster. Next to York was a rather cute brunette in her late 20s. She had fair skin and warm brown eyes. She looked a little nervous, or maybe just excited to be working in Murder Town. She was Grace Fletcher. "Detective Fletcher, this is Detective Murphy. He's one of the best men we have. You'll never meet a man who works harder than him," York stated. Isaac extended his hand and shook Grace's. There was a stark contrast between Isaac's chapped and callous hands to her professionally manicured nails. No varnish, but nicely shaped and shining. For a moment the handshake stuck, and the two met eyes. Grace found much in his eyes that frightened her. Past the cool facade of professionalism, there was a near hopeless emptiness behind his gaze. Isaac shrugged. "Captain, I think that title belongs to you." York chuckled dryly. "I just yell at people all day." Grace put on a smile, trying to wash away the nervousness.
Detective Murphy? Isaac's fine. Right, Isaac. I've read all about you. Very impressive resume. The Blackhorn case? That was incredible. She complimented. Isaac gave a side eye to York. The only thing incredible about that case was the fact that I didn't collapse from exhaustion after not sleeping for 2 weeks. Grace chuckled nervously. But thank you. I'm looking forward to training you. We need all the help we can get, Isaac affirmed. York cleared his throat and spoke. Well, I've got to go put out a dozen fires, so y'all will have to continue the pleasantries without me. York headed up the stairs, passing by David, who was snacking on a bag of kettle corn. David saw Grace and wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. Ah, shit, he exclaimed. Grace glanced over her shoulder and David straightened himself up while shoving the butter-stained handkerchief into his pocket. And you must be Detective Miles, Grace Fletcher. Grace extended her hand and David wrapped his hairy paw of a fist around her hand. Grace's smile faltered when she realized her hand was now smeared with grease. Pleasure to meet you, Detective Fletcher. Just David is fine. Sorry. David downed the last few pieces of kettle corn as Isaac's phone vibrated. Isaac put it to his ear. Yep, we're on our way. Isaac hung up and looked at Grace. It's time to see one of the things that David and I do every day. Grace's eyes widened. Absolutely, what is it? Later, Isaac, David, and Grace consoled the grieving O'Donnell family. Mrs. O'Donnell cried into a stunned Grace's arms, and Grace started tearing up as well. Isaac and David, having performed this particular drill more times than they could count, were more or less stone-faced. While Mrs. O'Donnell kept Grace busy, Isaac and David attempted to question a shell-shocked Mr. O'Donnell and the redhead's young girlfriend. After several minutes, the inevitable demand for justice was made. Isaac, mustering up as much gusto as he could, gave an empty promise. Later, in the homicide department, Grace had just finished setting up her desk, right next to Isaac and David's. It was after hours now, and the three of them were discussing job expectations. Despite it being after hours, the place was still in pandemonium. Callahan PD never slept. Isaac leaned back in his chair and sipped some piping hot black coffee. David propped his feet up on his desk and mulled over a new case absent-mindedly, listening in somewhat to Isaac and Grace's conversation. If you don't mind me asking, how much did they sign you on for? Isaac asked. $75K, much more than I was making as a cop in Charleston, but I was hoping for more given the current situation, but I was ready to make the jump to detective. Isaac scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, that's 15 more than the starting salary was 3 years ago. Last year, the city voted to increase wages to attract more detectives. It should be more, given that this is Callahan, but there simply isn't enough money. The city has lost significant tax revenue due to a mass exodus by residents and tourism tanking. Grace leaned in quickly and puffed up her chest. Well, I didn't come for the money. I came, probably like most of the other new recruits, because I wanted to have a legitimate impact on the world as a detective. And I knew that Callahan was the city I needed to be in to do that. I want to save Callahan. I want to find the ghost killers and bring them to justice. Grace gave a confident smile as she finished. David golf-clapped sarcastically, causing her to flush. Isaac, in return, flicked a pen in David's general direction. It landed in his coffee mug with a splash. Oh, nice, David grumbled sarcastically. Grace tried to wipe the grin off her face. Isaac chuckled and turned back to her. That's very noble of you, and commendable, he said. Not enough detectives in this department still have that passion. Most people are just looking for a way out. Grace smiled warmly and Isaac reciprocated. David, fishing the pen out of his coffee, gave a snort in response. Grace folded her hands and turned to David. So, what are you fighting for? A paycheck, he muttered. Isaac chuckled dryly. Grace frowned and asked him the same question. So tell me, what's your story? What are you fighting for? Isaac receded a bit into his chair and Grace flinched, realizing she'd prodded a festering wound. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. Isaac waved her off. It's all right, he said. David glanced over at Isaac and held up his hand. Now might not be the best, David started, but Isaac waved him off as well. He took a deep breath and said the words quick to get it over with. I lost my wife and child just under 4 months ago. Double homicide. I want to find the man who did it. Isaac's eyes flashed darkly. And kill him, he thought to himself. Isaac shook his head and collected himself for a moment, then repeated,
I want to find the man who did it, and I want to save this city. I made a promise, so you and I have similar motivations, I suppose. Isaac tried a fake smile, but realized it was creepily cold and grimaced. Grace touched his shoulder in apology. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring up something so awful. Is there anything you need? Let me know. Isaac nodded. Thank you, Grace. Let's not discuss this anymore. How about you? Charleston, huh? You grow up there? He asked. Grace smiled, happy to change the subject. I did. Born and raised. Downtown? Isle of Palms. I love the beach, but well, who doesn't? I don't, Isaac stated flatly. Grace stared at him. Isaac stared back. Grace cracked a smile while Isaac casually took a sip of coffee. Well, most people like the beach, Isaac, she said, continuing with her story. I went to Clemson, majored in criminal justice, and put in my years as an officer so I could make the jump. Isaac finished his coffee and placed it down. Got any family around here? Grace shook her head. Just me. It was kind of spur of the moment. The position opened and I knew I had to take it. Isaac's eyebrows bunched together. So you just left your hometown to go live in the most dangerous city in the country with no friends or family around? Well, I was hoping to make some friends, and besides, it's only a 3-hour drive to Charleston. Well, color me impressed, Grace. David's phone started ringing. He pulled it out of his pocket and winced. Shit, he spat. Isaac glanced over. Something wrong? David's face flashed with pain. He answered the call and got up from his desk. Hey, babe, Okay. Shit. He headed toward the exit without a word to his partners. Grace and Isaac watched him go, concerned. What was that about? Grace asked. Isaac shook his head. I don't know. First time I've seen David that concerned. Probably ever. He glanced at his desk and all the paperwork, then looked at Grace's bigger pile of paperwork. You start your paperwork, it's how we get paid. Grace looked at the mountain of paperwork on her desk. Most of it was HR related. She stammered. Isaac chuckled. He checked the clock on the wall and stood up. Come on, just do that tomorrow. We got something more important to do. Excitement pinged on Grace's face. What is it? Later, in the basement shooting range, Isaac and Grace approached their stall. Isaac set up a paper target of a human body and put it out to 15 yards. Because at the time, the range was empty, which was a rare sight to behold. I saw the scores on your file. Your bookwork and street skills were exemplary, but your accuracy with a firearm... Isaac trailed off. Grace nodded sadly. I've never been a good shot. I just can't seem to get the hang of it. Isaac crossed his arms and looked Grace over. Bullshit, he declared. He pointed at her eyes. You got eyes, correct? Grace nodded, a little amused. He pointed at her hands. You got fingers, correct? Grace nodded again. Isaac pointed at the target. Then you can be accurate with a firearm. Let's practice. He pulled out his Glock 21 from his holster. They issue you your sidearm yet? He asked. Grace shook her head. No, they're doing that tomorrow, but I had a Glock 17 in Charleston. Isaac nodded. He ejected the magazine from his Glock 21 and showed off the 45 ACP bullets. So you were using 9mm, huh? It's faster and cheaper than 45. I thought about switching, but call me old school, I guess. They did force David to change his sidearm from my M1911 to a Glock, though. Said he had to get with the times. Grace chuckled. Now that is old school, she joked. Isaac handed her his Glock 21. Go ahead. Give me 10 rounds on the target. Grace teacupped the pistol and fired 10 rounds rather rapidly. The slide locked back and Grace put down the pistol. Isaac pressed a button that made the target swing back to them. Grace's results weren't bad, but they weren't particularly good either. Isaac picked up the pistol and handed it back to her. You know you're teacupping the pistol, right? They teach you that in Charleston? He asked. Grace nodded. Isaac raised his eyebrows. Now that is old school, and not good technique. Here, hold it like this. He positioned Grace's hands into a more effective grip style with the non-dominant hand perched high and to the left of the dominant hand with both thumbs perfectly in line with each other. I'd show you by example, but I'm currently using one hand, which isn't the most accurate way to fire, he muttered ruefully, touching his bandaged hand. Grace frowned. I was going to ask about that injury. Isaac shrugged. I punched a mirror. He said it so nonchalantly that Grace was speechless. Isaac pointed at her grip. That'll keep your aim steady and your purchase on the pistol more secure. Now, try again. Grace loaded another 10 bullets while Isaac sent the target out to 15 yards.
Grace emptied the magazine a little slower than the previous time. Isaac returned the target and looked it over. Not too bad, but there's still room for improvement. He sent the target out and started another drill for Grace to try. Later, it was 8 p.m. in the evening when they finished the drills. Isaac stuffed a dozen or so used targets into the recycle bin while Grace swept up the spent brass. She looked over at Isaac. Was it too much to hope for an example from the teacher? She asked. Isaac glanced again at his bandaged left hand, but Grace gave him an encouraging thumbs up. He shrugged. Well, we'll see. He attached a new target and sent it out to 25 yards. He loaded just 5 bullets into the pistol and grasped it with his good hand. Let's see. With one hand, Isaac fired all 5 rounds in rapid succession. The slide of the pistol locked back, and Isaac placed it down on the rack. He flipped the switch, and the target came back. Grace's jaw dropped at the results. Isaac rolled up the target and tossed it in the recycle bin without a word. I come down here almost every night, he stated. Grace nodded, then took a deep breath. Do you mind if I ask you a personal question? It's not about your family. Go ahead. What's it like to kill someone? Isaac didn't answer at first. He stared down the length of the firing range and rubbed his eyes. It doesn't hit you at first. It's not until you're alone that you really feel it. How you react depends on what kind of person you are. The scariest thing is if you feel nothing. Grace got back to sweeping brass. Isaac grabbed his empty Glock 21 from the stall shelf and holstered it. He turned to Grace. You're a good kid, Grace. I honestly wish you had never come to Callahan. Grace finished sweeping and the two moved to leave the firing range. I just hope I don't have to kill someone, she whispered. Isaac sighed. If you stay here long enough, you will. Later, the front door of the Murphy home swung open and Isaac stepped inside. He took one look at the utter disaster of his kitchen and dining room and turned away. Good job, Isaac. He dropped off his things and unholstered his firearm. He took it to the coffee table in the living room and placed it on the dark mahogany. Loosening his tie, he reached over to a cabinet and pulled out a black plastic case that held his gun cleaning kit. Cracking it open, he withdrew a few rags and some gun oil. He picked up the pistol, racked the slide back, and ejected the loaded magazine along with the loose bullet. He then field stripped the pistol and got to work cleaning it. He took his time, since he only had one good hand. Methodically, he wiped down the pistol with the rag and a drop or two of solvent. Once finished cleaning, he squeezed a few drops of oil into the slide rails and any other part that suffered from metal-on-metal friction. Isaac dropped one hollow point bullet back into the chamber and popped the slide forward. He slid in a loaded magazine and held the firearm in front of his face for inspection. Isaac stared at the cold black steel of the firearm. Won't be enough, he muttered. He gingerly looked left. Clear. He looked right. Clear. He looked up. Clear. Isaac laid the pistol on the coffee table and stood up. Now for the mess. For the next hour, Isaac cleaned up the wreckage, trashing anything that was broken and cleaning up all the stains and strewn food. He examined the dining room table and saw that it was damaged beyond repair. He pulled out big garbage bags and picked up all the pieces of broken mirror with his good hand. He carried the many garbage bags of rubble outside of the trash bin and then rolled it to the street. He then awkwardly carried the dining room table out as well. It split in half at the halfway point, so he had to make 2 trips. Back inside, he made a list of appliances and other replacements he would need to buy tomorrow. Casualties of his rage included a dozen drinking glasses, the microwave, the coffee pot, the dining table, the blender, and the chef's knife he had cut himself with. Isaac glanced down at his hand, which was throbbing with pain. He flexed his fingers and cursed his destructive behavior. Just as he finished the list, David called him. Isaac answered the phone. Hey, David, what time did you say? I know I'm late. Nope, we're still going strong, man. Bring some brews, his friend answered. Yingling good? Isaac asked as he headed to his bedroom to change. Yeah, for sure. I'll be there soon then. Great. Bill's here, by the way. Isaac rolled his eyes. Ah, Christ, that old fart, he exclaimed. David chuckled. Man's wound up tighter than a drum. I figured it might help to relieve the stress a little bit. Isaac shook his head and started to change into civilian clothes. He threw on a pair of jeans and an orange University of Miami t-shirt, his alma mater. Yeah, all right. See you in a bit, David. Later. Isaac slipped the phone into his pocket and bent down to lace up some gray sneakers. He threw on a plain baseball cap and then headed into his closet to the safe. He withdrew a small, inside-the-waistband holster with a compact Springfield 9mm pistol from his gun safe. He clipped the holster onto his belt and then tucked the Springfield in between his jeans and underwear. He dropped the t-shirt over his belt line, and the gun disappeared. While off duty, Isaac couldn't open carry, so he concealed instead. He preferred it this way. No one would know he had a gun on him. Before he flicked off the light, he stopped by the mirror next to the bed. He met the gaze of a man whose eyes shone with a seething fire. He could also see Emily's portrait, her face frozen in an eternal smile. He tore his gaze away from both and left the bedroom. Later, Isaac's car pulled into David's driveway. He parked it next to a half-dozen other cars, including David's motorcycle, before stepping out. He looked briefly at the passenger seat where the freshly bought 12-pack of Yingling sat. Isaac glanced down at his hand, which was still hurting. He changed the bandages again before leaving. He slowly closed his fists and winced at the jolt of pain. "Isaac, that you? Hope you brought the beers because we're nearly out," David called from the front porch. Isaac gave a wave to David and then grabbed the 12-pack. He exited the car and started the walk to the porch. David lived in one of the many suburbs in Callahan County, but this far out from the city, the woods were in every direction. Isaac squinted at the dark tree line behind David's house. He thought he saw something moving in the shadows, but blinked and it disappeared immediately. Perhaps it was just a shadow. He reached the stoop. "Isaac, about time," David exclaimed. His eyes were red and puffy. Isaac feared that he must have had plenty to drink. "Damn, already blitzed?" Isaac asked. David narrowed his eyebrows at Isaac, confused. "No, I've only had a couple. I wanted to wait for you before I got into it." Isaac had another look at David's bloodshot eyes, confused. He shook his head and waved it off. "Oh, my mistake. Here," Isaac said as he stepped over the threshold and handed David the 12-pack. David gave him a playful tap on the shoulder. "Come on, everyone's waiting." David and Isaac headed to the basement stairs. Along the way, Isaac noticed that neither Charlotte nor David's daughter Amy seemed to be home. He held his tongue and didn't mention it. He didn't want to bring up something negative on a night that was supposed to be fun. He took a glance at David's nice southern home, perfect to raise a family in, before reaching the basement stairs. Downstairs in the bedroom, the Texas Hold'em poker game was in full swing. David had the real deal, too, an immaculate and professional poker table. He took the game quite seriously. Chief Laramie was indeed there, and a half-burnt cigarette dangled from his lips. He was sweating profusely and surprisingly drunk. "Finally!" he called. "Here, toss me a beer." Isaac threw him a beer, and Laramie immediately popped it open and took a long swig. York was also there and had several empty bottles in front of him. He'd taken his glasses off and was very focused on the game. Next to him was Detective Johnson, a clean-cut, dark-skinned man in his mid-40s, and a good friend of David's. He adjusted his glasses and took a quick drag from a cigarette. "Isaac, good to see you," he exclaimed. Isaac shook the hand he offered. "Same to you. Now who's going to deal me in?" Isaac took an empty seat and nodded at Officer Austin, who was next to him. Austin pulled out a metal tin of snus smokeless tobacco and popped a pouch in between his cheek and gum before extending the tin towards Isaac. "Isaac, care for a pouch? It'll keep you focused," he said with a Beaufort twang. Isaac shrugged and took a pouch, making Austin smirk. After sticking the pouch behind his upper lip, Isaac popped the tab on his beer and had a nice swig. Laramie started dealing out the cards and the game resumed. Later, David, as usual, was winning by a long shot. He could probably go pro if his wife let him gamble for real money. Everyone else was at various levels of intoxication, aside from Isaac, who was just nauseous. Austin had failed to tell Isaac how strong the nicotine in snus was. Isaac spat it out after 5 minutes, but the damage had already been done. Meanwhile, Chief Laramie was 4 beers deep along with a considerable amount of honey whiskey. The bottle sat in front of him on the poker table with vibrant green felt, right next to his empty chip pile. "God damn it, David, I swear you cheating. Every time I play, you win," Laramie slurred. York chuckled, lighting up another cigarette as he beheld his own non-existent chip pile. "Well, at least he didn't knock me out first this time. Thank Christ I don't play for real money." He fished out another cigarette and handed it to Johnson, who happily accepted. As York lit the cigarette, Johnson smiled through the smoke and said, "I still consider myself a novice, so it's okay that David shamed me right off the bat. Let's see if Isaac or Austin can pull off an upset." Austin popped 2 pouches of snus into his mouth, which was going to make him absolutely wired. Isaac examined his hand. He had 1 king and 2 more were in the river, so this one should be in the bag. He raised and David immediately matched. Yeah, I got nothing, Austin muttered and folded. It was just Isaac and David now. David shot Isaac a death glare as Isaac did his best to match the intensity. Show him, Laramie commanded. Isaac put down his three of a kind. David put down a queen and the final king, giving him a full house. Isaac sighed. David grinned big and wide. Read 'em and weep, pretty boy. David's smile was almost too big, Isaac thought. It seemed like he was trying to convince everyone how happy he was. David pulled his newly acquired chips in and rubbed his hands together. This is gonna be it. You and Austin are on your last legs now. Laramie dealt the new hand and Isaac picked up his cards. Without enough chips to pay for the blind, he and Austin would both have to go all in just to play the hand. Isaac glanced at his cards. Nothing. Oh boy, he muttered. Show 'em! The three men flipped their cards. As expected, David won again, this time with three of a kind. Everyone at the table groaned, except for David. Woo! Bring me that money. King D wins again. Laramie stood up suddenly, spilling a little of the honey whiskey. Well, that's it from me. I'm gonna get some air. David pouted. What? Come on. How about we play for money this time? Don't tell your wives. I know you got $20 in your pocket, Chief. Laramie scowled. First the $20, then the shirt off my back. He said, come on, let's go drink by the fire pit. It's nice outside. Everyone but David agreed. Later, David had a classy stone fire pit incorporated into his backyard, and all the men were camped around it, sitting on lawn chairs. Isaac tossed another log into the fire and it roared up, nice and hot. He popped the tab on his third beer and took a nice swig. He had finally recovered from the potent nicotine high and had made a mental note to never try chewing tobacco again. A gentle breeze blew through the yard, causing the flames to flutter. The men had fallen quiet, just enjoying the cool spring breeze, the booze, and the beautiful firelight. Isaac leaned back in his chair and absent-mindedly watched the tree line, now much closer than it was in the driveway. There! Isaac jolted forward and rubbed his eyes. He was sure he saw something moving in the woods. He studied the trees, but the figure had disappeared once more. See something, Isaac? David asked. I swear I just saw someone run in the trees, but I'm not sure now. David glanced over at the trees and shrugged. It's probably just a deer. The crackheads don't get this far out of the city. He joked. If it is, though, I'm pretty sure all of us are strapped right now. Johnson narrowed his eyes. Well, maybe it's one of the ghost killers, he whispered melodramatically. David chuckled and took a swig of beer. Damn, I wish it was. We could grab his ass and finally get some damn answers. Isaac stared deep into the orange flames of the fire. The flickering lights reflected off his pale face and green eyes as he lost himself in the flames. Maybe it's the wretched man, he whispered. A cold shiver passed through the men. It was an icy flinch. Not even the hot fire could keep away. Laramie scowled. Knock it off. I don't want to hear that damn name ever again, he commanded. York held up his hand to keep Laramie back. Hang on, Chief. Everyone, listen up. I got something to say about that, he said. The men all looked at York curiously. What is it? David asked. York met eyes with Isaac and found the flames. I've thought about it and decided I want to change my rule on that. I don't agree with this refusing to utter the name nonsense. By avoiding the word like the plague, it just adds further negative connotation to it. It is a fairy tale. We shouldn't be so afraid of it. We shouldn't be afraid to say the name. Giving a name to a monster makes it less scary, real or not. Some of the men nodded, but Laramie bared his teeth. I don't want to utter the name of, that name, because I want our focus to be on capturing real-life criminals, not ghosts. You're afraid of him. That's the real reason why you won't say his name, Isaac said. The circle fell silent, with only the crackling of the fire making any noise. Laramie's face contorted, and he started to argue. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the backyard. Johnson nervously checked left, right, and up. David squinted at him. What was that? He asked. Johnson blushed a little, uncomfortable at being caught. I don't know, just checking around me. Checking for what? Laramie questioned, crossing his arms. The wretched man, It's how you check for him, Isaac answered. Johnson winced. Laramie pursed his lips together, glowering at Isaac. This is ridiculous, he cried. York shrugged. Left, right, up. At least you can get a good visual of your surroundings that way. Laramie smashed his honey whiskey bottle into the fire, causing the flames to soar into the sky. Everyone recoiled in surprise. Hey now, David exclaimed. Laramie stood up and sneered at everyone. I am not going to sit here and listen to grown men, my own detectives, entertain the idea that a fairy tale is haunting this town. That thinking is turning this city into a madhouse, just one big echo chamber of fucking lunatics screaming at each other. You still haven't said his name, Isaac pointed out. Laramie poked a large finger in Isaac's face. I expect more from you, Detective Murphy. Emily would have been disgusted to see you entertain this bullshit. Isaac lunged at Laramie, but David and York got between them. Settle down, David yelled. Isaac pulled away and sat back in his seat, while Laramie dusted himself off and adjusted his askew glasses. Look, we all got a little drunk, but that's no excuse for hurling comments like that, Chief. Why don't you apologize and then walk home to sleep it off? David recommended. Laramie sighed and extended his hand to Isaac. I'm sorry. That was uncalled for. Isaac looked at Laramie's hand before shaking it. It's okay, Chief. It happens. I went too far as well. Isaac shook Laramie's hand. Laramie turned to David and warned, Y'all don't cause too much trouble now. We're still the law in this town. With that, Laramie left to trudge over to his house. He lived just up the road and didn't need to drive. David checked his watch and saw that it was past 1 a.m. Another gust of wind blew in and he shivered. Sheesh, y'all want to head inside? It's starting to get blustery out here. And hey, if anyone wants to stay over, feel free. Everyone started to head in, except Isaac, who continued to stare into the flames. Isaac? David asked, questioningly. I'll be inside in a moment, just gonna put out the fire, Isaac answered. David shrugged and followed the others. Isaac finished his last few swallows of beer and sat back in his chair. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Inhale. Count to 5. Exhale. Count to 5. Oh, Emily, what have I gotten myself into? Isaac's words were whisked away into the wind. A drop of rain landed on his nose and he shivered. Isaac's ears perked up and he looked to the right where the voice had come from. For a moment, he thought it must have been one of the guys, but then he remembered that they had all gone inside. He found himself staring at the tree line again. It was near pitch black past the glow of the fire, and the ominous black trees swayed in the wind just 50 feet away. Isaac squinted, trying to see through the darkness or where the voice came from. That wasn't the wind, Isaac whispered. He stood and took a few steps toward the tree line. He dug into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He clicked on the phone light and held it up, using the light to cut through the darkness, but it did very little to illuminate anything. He wished he'd brought his duty flashlight. Anyone there? Isaac asked. He took another step and shined the pathetic phone light left and right, but saw nothing. He shrugged and started to turn, but then he heard it. The unmistakable sound of crying. A man was weeping in the woods. Apprehensive, Isaac looked back at David's house, which now seemed very far away. He turned to the tree line, which was now just a few feet away. Damn it, Isaac swore. He reached his hand under his shirt and rested on the cold steel of his compact Springfield. Hello? Is anyone there? But his words were swallowed by the darkness. Help me, Isaac. Isaac drew his pistol and snapped it up in front of him, training the glowing green night sights on the trees in front of him. He shivered and looked left, clear. He looked right, clear. He looked up, clear. He took a bracing breath and entered the tree line. Police! Who's there? He called out. He took a few more steps forward, and David's house disappeared. Isaac plunged deeper into the black woods, shining the phone flashlight, but seeing nothing. I'm right here. Isaac placed his finger on the trigger and aimed at a large tree in front of him. The voice was coming from behind it. Isaac shined his phone light around the corner and saw a pale hand lying on the ground, with the arm disappearing behind the tree. Isaac swallowed and began to pre-pull the trigger. "Police, don't move," he commanded in a shaking voice. He took a side step and pointed his gun behind the tree. The redhead's butchered corpse was filleted against the tree. His internal organs were strewn about the roots, and two mangled eyes stared at Isaac from his shattered skull. Maggots crawled in and out of his busted eye sockets and feasted on the rotting intestines. "Jesus Christ!" Isaac stumbled backward in shock. He tripped, and his phone went flying from his bandaged hand. It was all he could do not to squeeze off a round as he fell onto his back. Isaac scrambled desperately for his phone, horrified at the pitch blackness surrounding him. He dug blindly at the rotting leaves, trying to find his phone, which had landed face down. At last, he touched the case, and with a cry of relief raised both the light and his pistol at the tree. But the body was gone. No blood, no organs, nothing. Just the rustle of leaves in the wind. A cold sweat ran down Isaac's neck. His chest tightened, and he felt like he couldn't breathe. He was sure something was on top of him. Slowly, with his muscles and bones creaking, he looked left. Clear. He looked right. Clear. Painfully, he looked up. Clear. Isaac shakily got to his feet. He needed to get out of these woods now. He took one last look at the tree where O'Donnell's body had been, then tore his gaze away. "Emily, please protect me," Isaac whispered. He turned heel and sprinted from the woods, too terrified to look back. As he burst through the tree line, he nearly collided with David and York and fell to the wet ground. "Shit!" David yelped. York helped Isaac to his feet as David looked on incredulously. "What the hell were you doing in there? I thought you were just putting out the fire," York asked. "And why is your gun out?" Isaac didn't know what to say. He holstered his pistol and then wiped his sweaty forehead. I had to see if anything was in there," he said in a low voice. York peered into the woods and strained his neck for a better view, but saw nothing. "Well, did you find something? Given your state, it sure does look like it." Isaac tried to force a reassuring smile, but failed. No, I just got spooked." York and David exchanged a glance. They weren't buying it. "Right. Well, I think it's time we went home. Good night," York said, already walking to his car. Isaac gave David a weary glower, who met it with a frown. The two returned to the house where everyone else had already left. Isaac started to gather his things, but David stopped him with a pleading look. "Would you mind staying in the night? Please? I'll make up the couch." David's voice broke on the final word. Isaac was taken aback. He steeled himself and asked the question he'd been hoping to avoid. "Where is Charlotte?" "She told me she's not coming back tonight," David said blankly. "Why?" "She didn't say." Isaac winced and asked a follow-up question. "And where's Amy?" "With Charlotte." Isaac felt the pain of that flat statement like a knife in his sternum. He gave his best friend a hug. They held it for a moment, and David blinked back tears. "It's going to be all right, big guy. I'll stay tonight, okay? Neither one of us should be alone right now," Isaac promised. David walked into the kitchen and poured another drink. "I hope so, buddy. I really do." David knocked back another shot.